So that's where I want to wrap up. I want to thank you for the time this evening, and we'll do questions. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bruce. Just to kind of give us an idea, first of all, my name is Dionne, so thank you for joining us here tonight. Just to let all of you guys know, if you are new to Crossroads, what we normally do on Saturday evening after service is have a time of questions and that we're going to answer. I know that probably many of you have a ton of questions for Bruce. Does anybody in the house have any questions for Bruce?
Where did all the water that created the flood come from?
Great question. The Bible, go back to the Bible as a starting point. It doesn't give exhaustive knowledge, but it gives a framework to start to understand the past and things. It says the fountains of the great deep broke forth. And the whole earth has this split in it. I mean, there's a mid-Atlantic ridge where from the North Pole all the way down to Argentina through the middle of the Atlantic, and then running up through California all the way to Alaska, there's a ring of fire where the earth literally has split open. So enormous amounts of lava and magma must have poured up out of the earth. By the way, every volcanic eruption has enormous amounts of water vapor pouring out with us. So underneath the earth, the original creation, I suspect there was lots of water and also lots of magma. When God brought judgment upon a totally sinful mankind, and that flood is an act of God. You don't have to have some natural cause. He caused the flood to happen. And by the way, because God's outside of time, he knew Adam was going to sin. He knew mankind was going to become totally depraved. And he wanted there to be an example that sin brings absolute agony and destruction and death. So he brought it in a way so that flood locked death into every rock layer across the entire earth for all of time in all locations. And all we have to do is look down and see death and know we brought that upon ourselves. Our sin brought this upon the planet. So the water poured out from underneath the planet. That magma is shoving water up out of the ocean basins, and it is flowing across the continents that existed before the flood. Now, there's also enormous amounts of evidence that the continents had to have shifted and moved in position. That flood waters did not have to cover Mount Everest or Mount Whitney because the Rockies did not exist before the flood. The Himalayas did not exist before the flood. The Alps did not exist before the flood. The Andes did not exist before the flood. They're all made at the tops of the mountains from sedimentary rock filled with sea creatures. Seashells. So the tops of the mountains were underwater at some point in Earth history. Nobody denies this. Those who hold on to the old time frame just believe the continents were moving over hundreds of millions of years, and like Europe is moving away from North America at like about the width of a fingernail each year, about a fourth of an inch each year. So they divide the width of the Atlantic Ocean by a fourth of an inch per year, and they say it's taken 200 million years for those continents to move apart. Well, that's not a fact, that's an assumption. There's reasons I don't have time to get into that the continents would have been moving very rapidly, probably at miles per hour during the flood. India slams up into Asia probably a month 4, 5, or 6, and it shoves up the Himalaya mountains. All those sediments have been laid down over those earlier months. You're starting to follow the biblical picture. So where did all the water come from? It was pushed up out of the original oceans and from deep subterranean sources. Where did it go to? As the continents rose at the end of the flood and the ocean basin sank, it flowed back down into the oceans. Here's a fact of science. If you just smoothed out the earth so the mountains weren't so high and the oceans weren't so deep and it was just a smooth globe, the entire earth would be covered with 8,000 feet of water. The entire globe.
Wow.
That's how much water there is on the earth. There's more than enough water to flood this entire globe. It's just, it has shifted around both during and after the flood, where the ocean sank, the land masses rose up. And by the way, one of the Psalms of David say that. The mountains rose up, the valleys sank down, and the waters returned from whence they came. It's talking about the flood. So does that give you a little better picture of what was happening and all that water during the flood? I have trouble just doing like a 10-word summary because I
That's
try
okay.
to teach while I'm answering these questions.
So do you feel climate change, what do you feel about that? What do you
Well,
think?
it always comes up, especially with young people, especially with junior high, high schoolers. They're trying to figure out, well, what about the climate? Because over the last 2 decades, the education system has worked the next generation to a fervor that the planet's about to be destroyed. We're told with it, you know, the land masses are going to be flooded with water. The polar caps are going to be totally melted. It's not beyond comprehension and possibility that mankind's activities have changed our climate. It could be. But there's also data that seems to show that when this whole thing started back in the 80s and 90s, it was called global warming. But then there was a 10-year period where all the indicators seemed to indicate things had gotten colder for 10 years in a row, ever so slightly. So they changed it to the whole terminology to climate change. I get really suspicious of things like that. We've also shown there was a little mini ice age back in the 1400s, and there were warming periods at other times, way beyond what we see today. The real climate change was during the global flood. That flood with enormous amounts of magma pouring out into the ocean and massive amounts of frictional heat from continents moving would have heated the oceans not just a few degrees, like we're talking about now. You know, within 50 years, the oceans might be 2 degrees warmer. They would have heated it dozens and dozens of degrees. At the end of the flood, best estimate, those oceans would have been 60 to 70 degrees in the Antarctic and up in the polar caps. 70-degree ocean water. We find trees that have grown in Antarctica that are like 3 foot in diameter, entire forests that have been just grown and now they're gone. When? After the flood, there would have been an incredible warm climate worldwide. And it would have taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years for those ocean waters to cool down and cool down and cool down. And by the way, that is the ice age period of the Earth, because the weather patterns of the world are driven by ocean water temperature. And that's true. That is a concern. As oceans change and we've got El Niños, we get different weather patterns. Well, much warmer ocean means more evaporation. That water's got to go somewhere. It's going to come down as snow in the northern latitudes, rain near the equatorial regions, and you're going to have like lands flowing with milk and honey in Israel, where today it's a desert thousands of years ago, and you're going to have huge sheets of ice building up in the north and southern latitudes. And week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, snow, 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 snow. That's climate change. So this Earth has already seen enormous climate change, and it survived. And we're talking about 1,000th or 1/10,000th of that magnitude of change, sending an entire generation into absolute panic. So I just think, put it in perspective, things do change. We do need to take care of creation. We're given dominion. We don't want to waste it. We don't want to pollute it. We don't want to destroy it. But let's keep it in a perspective of reality as we use what God has given us. That's a long answer to an easy question.
All right. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Big round.
Yeah.